Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Friday morning. Glenn Kellaway from the basement. Thanks for joining me. Please, before we start, just look down and see that white button that says subscribe. If you have not done so, please do so. It helps me out immensely. And a thumb up or down, whatever you want to do, would be much appreciated. I started a kind of a mini series a couple of videos back on the 60s, really the iconic years from 65 to 1969, where I kind of pick a seminal moment or I'm going to say a headline for the year in music. 65, I talked about Dylan and the Beatles. And in 1966, the headline is The Birth of the Double Rock Album, studio album. Now, I'm sure there was some double albums out before of compilations of this and that, and I heard there was some dude in 1960 releasing them, but nobody's ever heard of the guy, so let's not get nitpicky here. There were two important albums released in 1966, double albums, a week apart, believe it or not. Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Freakout. Let's get going with Blonde on Blonde. As I stated in the last video, 1965, Dylan puts out Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61. I mean, just full of incredible songs. And then the dude goes back in the studio. And we're talking in October 65. He's back in the studio in New York. And he's with Al Cooper and a few of the guys from the band. And they're trying to come up with some arrangements for songs and developing songs. And the only thing they come up with that actually makes it on the album is One of Us Must Know Sooner or Later, which is actually one of my favorite Dylan tracks. Bob Johnson, the producer, says, let's go to Nashville and record. Let's get some of the Nashville studio guys and let's try it down there. So they head down there. The only people that came with him were Robbie Robertson and Al Cooper. The rest were all the famous Nashville session guys who were used to going in a studio and pretty much doing cookie cutter stuff. I mean, they did the Nashville number system. You used the 1-4-5 chord and whatever else. You never mentioned chords. You just said 1, 4, or 5 or whatever. They recorded in Nashville February and March. Completed the album. The funny thing was Bob was still working on the songs, and he would go in another room and be writing lyrics, and they're not used to this kind of stuff, and they're all sitting around playing cards and going up. All of a sudden, Bob's going, "Okay, I got it," and he comes out with a song like "Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands" or "Visions of Johanna" or whatever, and just starts playing it, and they're going, "Okay," and they come up with this brilliant stuff. The album's incredible. 3 singles off of this album. Surprisingly, none of them hit the top 10 from what on the Billboard charts. I kind of remember in Canada that Rainy Day Woman was a pretty big frickin' hit, top 10, but maybe that was in Canada. I don't know. So Rainy Day Woman and I Want You got into the top 20 in the Billboard charts. Just Like a Woman, which you'd think would be like number 1, just made the top 30 on the Billboard charts. Crazy. But anyway, Bob Dylan's incredible album, my favorite. Vision Johanna, my favorite Dylan song. Absolute masterpiece, in my opinion. Next, Frank Zappa, Mothers of Invention. So the Blonde on Blonde album came out on June 20th, 1966. Mothers of Invention, Freakout, was released June 27th, 1966. Isn't that crazy? Tom Wilson, the great producer, was out searched for L.A. blues bands, white L.A. blues bands. Walked into the Troubadour, or one of those famous clubs in L.A. where Zapp and the Mothers were playing, and they were playing a blues song when he went in, and was really impressed. Signed them right away. Went, oh, I got my blues band. I think he called back to Columbia saying, I got the band. This is it. We're going in the studio. This album, so Tom Wilson gets in, they start recording a song. I think Anywhere the Wind Blows was the first track that they recorded, which is, a pretty basic kind of track. You could kind of go, okay, that's what I signed up for. The second song they worked on was Who Are the Brain Police? Tom Wilson, I think Frank Zappa said he looked up into the control room and saw Tom Wilson, panicky look on his face on the phone to back to New York going, I don't think this is a blues band. And he jumped on board pretty quick when he realized what was going on. Freakout, kind of a satirical album on pop culture, the rock scene. Just some great stuff on here. Really amazing debut. It was funny how I was really fortunate that I had a friend who was really hip on all the new albums coming out. I couldn't believe she was knew about everything. I don't know. In those days, there was no press or anything. I don't know how she did it. But anyway, she introduced me to this album very early on. So I was a bit of a Mothers of Invention fan pretty early on. Saw them in 1968, the original band in Toronto at the University theater called Convocation Hall. And so anyway, some of the interesting things on this is this album, when it was released in the UK, was released as a single album originally. I did not know that until I started doing some research. It was just an edited single disc. That's crazy. I wonder if anybody over in the old country would happen to have a copy of that single album. It must be worth a couple of bucks. Anyway, Frank Zappa, Freakout, Bob Dylan, Blonde on Blonde. Now, here's an interesting thing. I was trying to think of what the third double album would be. These are the first two, always considered the first two. What was next? I was racking my brain. You know what? I couldn't find another double album for 2 years. The White Album. Try and find one. There's nothing. And then after that, I think it's 1969 and Tommy. I think they're the first four. So, really interesting that it took so long for that to happen. Now, we're going to come up to 1967. So I want to make this mention because this is going to be an introduction kind of. It's something that's going to be discussed when we hit 1967. Is Revolver came out in 1966. And on Revolver, there is a George Harrison track on here, which is called Love You Too, which has a lot of sitar in it. Now, George had already introduced the Beatles to sitar with Norwegian Wood off of Rubber Soul, but what you got to understand is that George actually just took a sitar. He got interested in these instruments when they were doing the Middle Eastern theme, or East Indian theme through the movie Help. He actually picked up a sitar and came up with a lick that went quite well with Norwegian Wood, but it wasn't really playing the sitar as it's meant to be played in the Indian classical style. So Love You Too got a little closer to that, and then George met this man, Ravi Shankar, and basically became a disciple, and Ravi taught him how to play the sitar. So it wasn't until 1967 when Sgt. Pepper came out with Within You, Without You, where that was actually based on the disciplines of Indian classical music. So that's really when it kind of got started. The other ones, there were people like Brian Jones and that who were dabbling with the sitar the same way George was. They just liked the sound of the instrument and were coming up with melodies and lines and stuff. But Within You, Without You and Sgt. Pepper was really the start. In 67, Ravi's going to make an appearance. So that's it for 66. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Everyone have a great day.